Wes, thanks so much for joining me. Really excited to have you on this episode of Revenue North to talk about product-led growth. But let's start as always with taking a little bit of a step back. I'd love to hear a little bit about your own personal story and kind of what got you to write the book and to be so focused on product-led.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember the first conversation I had with VP of product. I'm like, so Jeff, how did you get into the world of product? And he give me the typical canned question, or a response like, you just kind of wind up here, Wes. And I initially heard that. I'm like it's not, it doesn't tell you much, but I feel like the exact same thing. Like I literally just wound up in product. I don't even quite consider myself like a product person, yet everyone else around me does. And so my story is interesting. Like I really got basically obsessed with marketing at an early stage. Both my parents are like realtors. And so I was helping them out early on with Google ads, and that was coming out. And we launched a bunch of these campaigns, and I eventually got one of these leads to turn into a customer, and they sold their house. And at that point, what got me super excited, I was like, oh, cool. That's the whole game of business. To that primitive view at that time, I was like, that's it. That's demand creation. And so I got super fascinated with the whole inbound marketing movement, content marketing. I just obsessed about this stuff. And then I started working in B2B SaaS companies. So there was Exonify and Waterloo, then Vidyard. And at both of them, I was focused really on the same thing, which was all around how do I help these companies generate high quality leads for their sales team? And so in both of them, they were venture backed. I had large budgets to go out and acquire these potential customers. And so to the young person in me, I was just kind of amazed. I'm like, I'm spending hundreds of dollars for these contacts. They're just downloading our white papers and we're sending them to the sales team. And then I'm talking to the sales team. I'm hearing hey, this person doesn't understand what Vidyard is. They think we're an agency or something. And I'm like, oh, no. That must have been a bad list. There goes 10 grand or 20 grand. And so it just felt a little weird for me to really, I didn't quite buy that way myself. And so the way I was approaching it was quite different. It was really, at the end of the day, I didn't realize it, but that was the traditional B2B SaaS playbook. And still many companies are using this approach. And so luckily at Vidyard, we ended up launching this freemium product. And that got me pretty excited because I was able to help that company really market this product. And it went from 0 to 100,000 users very quickly. And when that happens, it really kind of clicked for me. I saw that the product, it wasn't just this big clunky thing we sold. It was actually our customer acquisition model. And so it's still me being obsessed about this whole demand creation thing, but it's really me also realizing that the product is a piece of that. And a part of that solution is the way we buy has changed. And really to sell to the modern buyer now more than ever, you need to show people what your product's capable of, show them how it can help them versus just simply telling them about it. Because that's really the old sales-led way. We just simply tell people, we show them a demo and tell them how this is going to help them. But the buyer at the end of the day takes a ton of risk. So this is why I'm still obsessed about products from the marketing lens and how I fell into it. So hopefully that's not a long-winded way of going through my story.
No, that's perfect. And would definitely love to. So you have this aha moment, right? I read the book and you go through the traditional, as we said, the SaaS playbook, which is so typical of companies, which is let's allocate a massive budget to MQLs and design all these different lead forms and lead gen areas and have people plug in, pass that on to the sales team. But in a lot of cases that is so fragmented, they don't even get to follow up with them for around a week or so. And you'll see the conversion rates just plummet. And then the aha moment for you as you experiment with this freemium model, just talk a little bit more about that and kind of what you were told to do originally with the MQL side and just the difference of using the freemium. I would love to hear just a bit more about that.
Yeah. So like you mentioned too, with the old MQL model, it was really just we were tasked for the demand gen team. We have to hit X number of leads.
MQLs, yeah.
Yeah. And so there was organic that was driving a good amount, and those were usually the best quality folks. But since we were given this money, we were always like, hey, how do we get, double that or triple that? Because we want to grow faster. And so we would just like try and find, okay, what are other channels, other sources? And like one of the ones I was in charge of actually was like content syndication. And like we were just hiring other people to go out and find the leads for us. And that they're obviously using our white papers and content to capture those people. But when we did get them, it was just like, hey, this is like a very top of funnel person. They might not even understand our brand because it wasn't even like curated on our website kind of deal. So it just brought a lot of problems. Like there was the expense of it, which was enormous, because now we're like, hey, these people are going to take forever to convert. They don't understand us. They don't have that intent. And then when I looked at like a lot of the white papers we were writing, like we had an amazing content team at that time, but it was just like the main call to action at the end was always like, see our product, sign up for the demo.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute, like it's on like video strategy and stuff. Why can't we just show them? And so that's really what prompted me. Whereas whenever it came to the freemium approach and that difference, it's like, we're not really saying like, hey, read our white paper. It's really amazing. The copy is on point. The images are on point. We made the best white paper ever. No, it's all about, let me show you what the product can actually do. The only thing that's going to keep you coming back here is if we solve your problem. And so it was just like, of course, like that makes a ton of sense. Like we don't see Slack and Zoom, like creating all these big old white papers and leading with that in their marketing copy. So why would we expect anything different? Like, it's just like, here's the product. You like it, you don't understand how to use it. Hopefully we can make that as seamless as possible for you. And if so, like your chances of buying actually skyrocket.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and we can go deep into MQL versus PQL and just how much more valuable it is if somebody's actually tried the product and raised their hand either in a freemium model to upgrade or in more of a free trial model to talk to sales, how much more valuable that is than clicking through a lead form. But I would love to, I mean, so you have this discovery, it's a big one. You decide to write the book. What happens next? I mean, what companies reach out to you? Just more on that for sure.
Yeah. So like it was over like kind of like a 4-year process that I've had this business. And so like the first couple of years, we're still like doing more just like consulting for early stage startups and helping them around a lot of these problems that were product led. It just wasn't really called that at that time. It was more like onboarding, free trial versus freemium model kind of problems. And I don't know, I just had that attachment to that problem. I like that problem and it was fun to solve and still is to this day. But before the book, it was actually a course. So I had a friend, he was working he's actually the business partner now. His name's Ramley John. And so he was doing some work with CXL. And so CXL, for those who don't know, it's like a conversion rate optimization learning as well as like agency platform. And so they hired me to do this course and I was like, hey, why don't I just see like if I can do this course on product growth, like because this topic is really fascinating to me anyways. So I started this course and made like the typical rookie mistake of like any first time course creator would do, which was you try and like chew the entire topic in one. So it was basically like, this is the product-led growth course, all encompassing. And then I was going through that course and like halfway through, I was like, holy cow, there's a lot more to this than ever before that I had any idea. It's like, the old iceberg analogy, you see like the top, and that's what I saw when I was starting out with building out the course. But then I get through and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is such a deep topic. Like there's so many ways you could explore this. And like anything that drives you to write a book and actually do it to the end, it's really like curiosity. And so I was like, I'm very curious about this. There's a lot more that I didn't actually know that kind of fits into this. And so, yeah, after that's a bit of maybe 4 or 5 months later from that course and finishing it up, I decided like, let's go in on this book. and really create the playbook. So the playbook was actually more for me than anyone else, because I was still doing a lot of consulting. And so I know like Tim Ferriss, he has this one like style of writing a book, which is basically like you find like a few close friends who you actually write the book for, and then like you paste their photo up on like whatever Google Doc, and like you kind of look at them and you're like, I'm writing this for you, buddy. And like I did that with a client, and it was actually, I think, one of the reasons why the book was successful, because it's like it's actually for a client that was going through this whole transition from sales led to product led. And so, yeah, people can relate to it because like, oh, cool. Like I was dealing with that same challenge too. So it's meant to be relatable from that client's view. So yeah, that's how I ended up writing it.
I would definitely love to hear about some of the first, because there's a question of, you know, which companies is product led for, but it's really for almost any company doing SaaS at the right addressable market and the right total contract value, right? Unless you're dealing with really, really high enterprise sales. But let's talk about that a little bit. So who's this a fit for? What types of companies have you helped? What results have you seen?
Yeah. So like, as far as SaaS goes, I believe every company could be to some degree product led, but are you completely product led or not? That's the tricky, messy middle. Because a lot of people, even the way I wrote the book subtitle, like how to build a product that sells itself. It's meant to be provocative in that sense. Like a lot of people think, hey, I could sell something without a sales team. So that's the next assumption. Do we need sales? And yes, it's meant to get you thinking about that. Because some product-led companies are very successful without sales. They have no intentions of ever hiring one single salesperson in their company. And that doesn't mean they have to sacrifice revenue. I've seen even 8-figure companies without a sales team, just with the product-led approach. But then there's the messy middle where you're thinking, well, hey, my product starts around like $4,000 per month. Is that touchless sale going to work? Because when you think about that, I mean, most credit cards, that's a lot of money to start transferring over. You might hit some limits, especially if you charge them annually. Like things just get tricky. So where do you think about having sales in this whole scenario? And what I always recommend is this one question you need to ask yourself is, when is sales adding value and when is sales adding friction? So if you're realizing like, hey, the demo request example is perfect. So on our website, if like the demo request is the only option for someone to go and see your product, they have to like go in there, click it, book a meeting with your team. Maybe there's some pre-qualification questions on that before you even get on a call kind of deal. And so there's a lot of friction, but it's like, is that necessary? Is that adding value to that person? Whereas if we look at in the product, someone, let's say they have to set up a very complex integration. If you literally had like a pop-up that said, hey, do you want to talk to a product expert right now? We realize most people have a challenge setting this up. That's value. That is very valuable for that person because they're going to look at that and say, oh, yeah, I do need help with that. This sucks. Like you can help them. And so that's really what it comes down to, is thinking about that spectrum. When is the friction from the sales process? When is the value? And that's where you can decide, should we add humans or automate this in a way that's more scalable?
Right. And I love what you said is every company should be exploring product led. It just depends a little bit on where you're at in terms of the overall sales motion. So let's take like a typical B2B SaaS company. It's just around Series A starting out. Their contract values are around 20K, but they're also exploring enterprise. So they're going to keep salespeople, right? Like what's a way for them to kind of dip their toes in and test this? And I guess what are some of the misconceptions that you hear when you walk into some of these companies that have done it the old way, in terms of just we run off MQLs, we have a predictable funnel, but buyers, as we know, are frustrated by it.
Yeah. So one of the common misconceptions there is a lot of people think that, if we go product led, we can't sell large deals. And that's often because they don't understand how to, like, what is their metric they sell by? And I refer to this as the value metric. So it's like if you're selling shoes, it's per pair of shoes. If you're in the marketing automation space or email, marketing space too, like it's usually subscribers. And that's how you sell. So like MailChimp gives you away 2,000 free subscribers. You can use them, abuse them, whatever you want in your email marketing platform. But when we're thinking about we hit that cap, then yes, you do have to upgrade and go to some bigger plans. And so a lot of times it's like, well, is that person necessarily even ready for that 20K investment right off the bat? And the answer is usually no. We're usually doing that because it's convenient for us and it warrants having that salesperson at the end of the day. Whereas that 20K deal, that's around like 2K, a little less than 2K per month. Okay, maybe that starts off with like $100 per month and they get a taste test of the product, they can see it. And as they start using more of that metric, whatever that is for your product, they can actually get up to that on their own. But maybe somewhere along the lines, you can definitely still have that salesperson if there is, let's say, for Slack, that's a good example. So if Slack has like 20 people from one company using it and they're consistently hitting all of their limits for the 10K message limit, then that can warrant having someone go out and reach out to the champion or maybe go through the job title, who is actually the person responsible for making this decision, and just prompting them, be like, hey, you're losing a lot of access to your messages. Do you want to continue to have access to them or should we delete them all? Kind of deal. And it's a good conversation for them to have. So that's how I would think about it. Yes, having that 20K limit, it may seem like a limiting factor. Like, hey, we're going to have people starting off at $100 per month. That's peanuts compared to what we have now. But yes, it can build. And at the end of the day too, these companies are probably having people ask them, can I have a trial anyways? So why not lead with that?
Right. Totally. I mean, the Slack example is a perfect one, right? Like somebody that is using 2,000, 3,000 messages in a couple of weeks on Slack is way better for a salesperson to reach out to than somebody that's just downloaded a white paper recently. Actually,
Yeah.
they know the product, they've used it, they're getting some value off it. The discussion's completely different and the salesperson isn't turning their wheels on it. So let's talk about something else that I think is another big misconception. I would love to get your thoughts too, is pricing. So pricing is, for a lot of SaaS companies, it's this thing where they keep it so close to the chest that we don't ever want to publish our pricing. What if our competitors see that? And we only show pricing if you go through an entire cycle with one of our salespeople. And even then the salesperson won't send you the pricing. We have to get on the phone with you so I can kind of explain and use a bunch of sales techniques. You just talk a little bit about some of the differences that you've seen with publishing pricing and walking through companies with that issue, because I think a lot of people have probably told you, I just really don't want to publish something like that. Or maybe you've gotten that before.
Oh, tons. And pricing was actually one of those pieces of the book where I was about halfway through writing it and I got to like chapter 10 and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like a huge gap in my own knowledge around just pricing. How does it fit into this whole product-led model alone? Because it's super interesting whenever you become product-led, because there's your pricing and revenue model, and then there's your customer acquisition model. Like if you give away everything for free, like your customer acquisition model is going to go like bing, you're going to acquire a lot more users, but are those going to become actual paying customers? That's the tricky part. Can you afford to give everything away for free and get a ton of users, or just sacrifice your revenue model? So I kind of coined it and named it as like, it's an arranged marriage really between your revenue model and your customer acquisition model. And so you got to find like, what is that fine balance? How much can you give away for free? How much do you need to charge by? And so finding that value metric is the missing link between the two, because like in MailChimp's example, they can give you like access to 2,000 subscribers. You can do and send any emails you want to them for life for free. But as soon as you hit that access limit, then yes, the time is for you to pay up. And if you want to keep using it, or maybe you want to delete contacts too, they still allow you to do that. So yeah, that's one thing I would definitely recommend for people to think more hardly about, because there is a very interesting balance between those two pieces.
So pricing is one of them. And then the other one is I'm in sales. There's salespeople watching this too. They're like, oh, PQLs are great. They're not a sales motion. What would you say to salespeople who are potentially kind of thinking about this and saying, is this going to remove the need for my job, or is it, what's it going to do for me? Like what would you say to them?
Yeah. So usually salespeople are the most resistant at the beginning. and they're thinking to themselves, oh my goodness, this company is going to fire me soon. I'm not going to have a job. But like when they actually roll it out and then the team starts handing them like product qualified leads, they're like, I want more of that stuff. That stuff's the best, because whenever it's someone using the product and getting value from it, the majority of the selling has already taken place. And that's really why I named the book like How to Build a Product That Sells Itself, because it's like whenever someone experiences the value of the product, the majority of the selling has just taken place. And at that moment, they're really ready to buy your product. And yes, that might involve still having a salesperson to help with that facilitation of making that purchase. But to that buyer, that's selling. The majority of it has already taken place.
Yeah, and as a salesperson, how I think of this too is, at some levels, there were a lot of leads that you didn't really want to go into anyway. Like somebody that literally just downloaded a white paper, and you're going to take an hour, and they might not even be close to your ideal buyer, and you're just wasting all of this time, as you said, that you could be following up with people who are actually the right fit in that demand generation cycle. And also at the enterprise level, there's always going to need to be salespeople, because there's so much more around onboarding and actual implementation. This is really about how can we get the low hanging fruit in and actually use the Archimedes lever that is our product to generate that demand and actually satisfy customers, right? It's not, it's not taking away work that you wanted to do in a lot of cases.
Exactly
right?
it.
Yeah, that's so critical. And so I'd love to jump to some of the results that you've seen specifically with early stage companies. Any Canadian examples would be great, but some of the results that you've personally seen in terms of going from this sales-led or MQL-led model to more of a product-led model.
Yeah, so I do actually have a Canadian example, happy to share. And so I'll give some context too to really set the stage for this story. So if you think about the products you use every day, there's one thing they have going for them, and that really just comes down to how quickly they can deliver on their value. Because when we think of like big enterprise products that we might use for work, like sure, if someone tells us we have to use the product, like we'll grunt through and like figure out how to use that product. But generally speaking, whenever we use those products, if they don't deliver on it, or it feels a little clunky, that user experience, like, hey, yikes, this feels messy, we usually just bounce. And so there's like the biggest pandemic here is whenever it comes to your product, you're losing 40 to 60% of users in that first user experience. So whenever they go into that product, 40 to 60% of users. And so that was actually pulled by Intercom in 2016. And every time I ask, we have 2 programs now for like product-led growth. Every time I ask our students, it's actually usually higher. So it's really a ton of people you're just losing at that very first experience. And that is because your time to value is a long time. So that's the pretext. The story I'm going to share with you is from a Canadian startup called Snappa.com. So they're like the Canadian competitor to Canva. They make it really easy to create graphics. And so I was chatting with Chris, the founder, in Chiang Mai, Thailand, of it, randomly enough. And so, one thing we kind of looked at, it was just like, okay, you have a crazy amount of signups on your website. He had a absolutely bonker, like from visitor to sign up conversion rate. It was double digits and just crushing it. So he's getting thousands of signups every single week for this product. But then their sign up process, you just simply click like, I want to sign up. I want to join this free. They had a freemium product, free version of the product. And they just asked for like your name, email, first name. So it was like 3 things, super basic to sign up. And so people would sign up, is no harm done, super easy to do. But then after that, they had to go to their email and activate that email address to show that they were a human and really verify that. And so in the SaaS space, that's actually really typical. Snappa wasn't doing anything that a lot of other companies weren't doing. It was just the fact that they wanted to verify the users so that they weren't sending a bunch of emails to unverified email addresses, and they could reduce spam. So there was like genuine reasons why you would want to have this one step at the beginning of the journey. But then I asked Chris, and I said, like, what percentage of users actually go into your product? of all the people that sign up, you have thousands of signups every single week. How many go into the product? So he didn't know. And then he gets back to me about an hour and a half later and says, oh my goodness, 27% of users who signed up for our product didn't actually go into the product. So I said, wow, that's a lot of people when we're looking at this amount of signups per week. And so I asked him, like, well, what are we going to do about that? That's a ton of people. And so what we thought we could do in this case, just as a test, is let's just delay this email activation step. So when first-time users can sign up, they actually go straight into the product so they can create their own graphics in a snap, hence called snappa.com. And so one thing, when we roll that out, it took him 2 weeks to roll out that whole change, we realized that like his monthly recurring revenue just started itching up and up. And by the end of the month, their MRR had actually gone up by 20%. So that 27% of users that just bummed out at the end of their journey because they didn't want to activate their email address, they actually started paying for that product like everyone else would, just because they're able to access the value of the product that much faster. So whenever you're thinking of building a product-led company, you have to really focus on how can we deliver on our value as fast as possible? Because once you deliver on your value, that's actually when the selling starts happening and when they start buying, because they made a decision on their own accord to say, hey, you just helped me. I want to continue getting access to this help. Here's a fair exchange or just currency. That's really how simple this model works, which kind of miffs me when we think of how complex we can make it up to be. But I hope that example really just shows you that conquering your time to value and making sure you deliver on your value as quick as possible has a big impact on your business.
Yeah, that's a great example. And your time to value example is also really apt as well, because one of the big things that we talk about a lot on this show is the importance of focusing on retention in SaaS, right? There's so much over focus on just getting the customer, when really the multiples of SaaS companies, the reason why they're so high is because we're expecting to keep that customer for 10 to 15 years, or hopefully even longer in terms of renewals. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about, because what we're talking about here is really reducing the friction in the buyer process. And I've sat beside a VP sales trying to buy a major product. I won't obviously name the name, but they had a use case in mind. They were ready to pretty much purchase, but they went through a form. They had a BDR contact them and said, hey, I need you to answer these 5 questions. Answer those 5 questions, and then the BDR said, okay, I'm going to need to do a call with you, and just got so frustrated that they're just like, I'm done with this. And so I would love to hear a little bit more from you about how reducing that friction has actually helped the longer tail or the longer term in terms of retention.
Yeah. And so there was a company just last week we were going through like their retention cohorts and just analyzing them for a freemium model business. And we even compared it to just like a standard free trial business, which like both are technically product led, but one is more product led.
Right,
if you think about it with the freemium model, because it's really just focusing on people can upgrade whenever they want. The onus is on the user, versus with a free trial model, it's really like onus is on the company. Like, hey, we're putting this artificial timeline on you to upgrade at this time. You're going to jump over it. You're going to upgrade in that 14-day period. That's up to you. And now, like in different products and models, like free trials, I'm not bashing them. They can still have great retention, but typically we tend to see that freemium has a much better retention rate. And that is really because when you're thinking about it, you can sign up for these products, you can use them for sometimes years, and then you might pull that plug to upgrade. But what a lot of people think is like, hey, as soon as I go freemium, people are going to take those years to upgrade. And this is going to be like the biggest long tail sale ever. So that is like a fear for so many founders whenever they go through this. But when we started looking through some of these freemium model retentions, we found that, hey, people are actually still upgrading like within the first few months. And that's just something you have to account for in terms of like how you do your projections and that payback period. But generally speaking, like you do see them upgrading in those first few months. And as far as retention goes, it is just outstanding to see that the retention goes way down with those freemium models, because people are just making that decision on their own. They know what they're signing up for. There's a lot risk. Whereas even with the sales-led company, they might buy the product and realize, it didn't quite solve the problem that I thought it would. And I had no way to tell that. It was just, I was talking to the salesperson, they didn't quite maybe explain it right, or maybe that product feature wasn't quite developed yet fully. And so there was no way for them to really test it before they purchased.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point on the freemium model, because you're like, I can think of a bunch of things that I use daily actually too, that I've been using for years. And like Grammarly is a great example. I've used that for so long, right? And they converted me a little while ago. And yeah, no, I mean, it's a key point. I guess the only thing that I'm thinking of now is I wanted to ask you about B2B SaaS company that wants to dip their toe into the water a little bit and test this, right? Freemium is probably the bigger ask, like free trials.
Don't
usually,
do it right away.
Yeah. I'm guessing it's free trial first. So yeah, like how would they test it? And what does a good test tend to be? Like if you get a company reaching out to you and says like, hey, I want to test this, like, should I test it for 6 months? What does that usually end up looking like? How do you advise them on that?
Yeah. So like if you're a sales-led company right now and thinking about, this whole, how do we become product-led and how do we test it out without sinking the ship potentially? There's a ton of ways you could test it out on a small scale to see if it works for you as you build that muscle, because it's like, just like going to the gym at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, if you want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger, like, okay, like go to the gym 24 hours and like, you might expect like, okay, I got to get some big results, but it's like, no, it's like a small concerted effort over a long period of time that might get you even close to that. Probably not, but maybe close. And so when it comes to like the sales-led muscle in your business, that's pretty strong if you're working on that. But if you're thinking about, okay, where do we start with this workout? What is that first workout routine for a product-led business? That might just be, I've seen a company in Brazil do this. It's called Octadesk. What they did was essentially they just launched a free trial like pretty much overnight. And it was really cool because they just had it and showed it to 1% of their website visitors. And it wasn't actually a free trial. It was really just more of one of those like request a free trial exhibits. And so whenever people did request it, they walked them through the product and they actually gave them like access to go through it. And it was more or less like a live free trial where you're walking them through and actually sharing like, here's how to get value from the product, and they're coaching them in that capacity. And so what's effective about that is you can actually start fairly quickly. It doesn't take a ton of work. You don't have to hire a bunch of people to get this started. Depending on your website traffic, like 1% of your traffic, maybe it's higher if you don't have much traffic, but you just want to get like a good consistent flow of people so that you can start regular testing and seeing like, how long does it take for people to get access to the product's value? Where do people, when we say it's easy to do this, they start rolling their eyes and they start telling us off because it's actually really hard for them to get access to it. And like nowadays, there's so many tools you could do this. I know there's like even like Demo Desk where you can both like live screen share and go through the product with them if they get stuck at some specific points. So like the technology's been there to do these like live trials and really see where the friction is. But like the one piece you would add as like an overarching level of this is like eventually you're going to realize that some pieces of this pseudo free trial experience take a long time. Maybe that is like getting the passwords and the email set up from the developer. Every time they sign up, you're like, I got to email him again. Jim's going to hate me. And then you start realizing like, hey, Jim, can we like automate this a little bit? So maybe as soon as they fill out that form, like bing, it just goes to my email. You don't have to talk to me. I don't have to talk to you. That'd be kind of nice. And you can start automating this as you go. So that's the way I would recommend approaching it, just to dip your toes in. It doesn't have to be, a big polar bear jump into the water and you're like, whoa, I want to get out of here real quick. It can be just dipping the toes in.
Yeah. I mean, to jump all the way into freemium, this is something where you're going to have to be really thoughtful and actually test, and you're going to learn a lot too. Like at what point do people upgrade on their own is like a huge information lever for your own sales team. People tend to get value when they click through these 3 ways, or that when they add 500 documents, or when they send 1,000 messages. Those are just good metrics to actually know about your product. I'm channeling a skeptic a little bit, or trying to push back, and thinking of somebody saying, Wes, I've got this amazing software. We just got funded. I've got some patent protection, but I'm scared of letting somebody just log into it. What if it's a developer of a competitor company that gets in there and figures out all my secret sauce and launches something else? I mean, what do you normally say to people who are worried about it on the IP side?
Yeah, from the IP, like, if it's easy to copy it, someone's going to copy it in some other way. And like, maybe you're just going to end up using that funding to hire lawyers and go through that way. That's going to be a very sad story. Like, here's how we actually like recaptured our capital investment, is we just sued everyone who copied our product. No, that's not a good long-term strategy. The best long-term strategy moving forward, and the thing that is very hard to copy, is actually developing an incredible customer experience and customer acquisition model. And so that's really the more powerful thing. It's like anyone can have an idea, but the first to scale often wins. And that's really what you have to consider.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's such a good point. You could just push back and say, there's a ton of talented developers that could make a version of Slack, right?
Yeah.
But try to beat Slack's customer acquisition or Slack's customer experience. Like, it's going to be almost impossible. Okay, so COVID's hit, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of companies are experimenting with new ways to capture customers. A lot of them, it's kind of innovate or die mode. Like, a lot of retail brick and mortar has to go to e-commerce to literally survive right now. So people are trying new things. This is probably a good time to experiment. But any other big reasons to actually try this sooner than later?
Yeah. And like, one of the biggest ones right now is just like customer willingness to pay for software products is just hit an all-time low. And everyone's looking to spend less on their software products right now, and they're reevaluating everything. And so when we think about that, it's like the customer willingness to pay has actually been going down for the last 5 years. It's gone down 30%. And I don't have a study for this particular year, but my hunch is that in 2020, the customer willingness to pay for products across the board has taken a hit. And so when we think about that, okay, people want to spend less for your product. Well, okay, if we're just going to keep doing things as is, are we just going to reduce our margins? Is that how we want to run our business, and just consistently lowering it? But if you do that and you think, okay, I'm going to be smart, I'm just going to lower the price and get more buyers kind of deal. On the other spectrum, customer acquisition costs have actually been increasing every single year. It's increased 50% in the last 5 years. So on one spectrum, you just have like this high customer acquisition costs consistently going up, and on the other, people want to pay less for your product. So if it's getting harder to acquire people, and it's getting harder to keep them there because they just want to pay less, what do you really do as a business? If you're sales led, the main reason it's really hard for you to compete in that situation is because it's a lot more expensive for you to sell your product than a counter product led company, because it's just like the cost of investment to even sell the product is so much higher. You have to hire salespeople, like that example you mentioned. They got to talk to the BDR first. They got to go to the AE. The whole customer acquisition process is very expensive. And so, give an example too. So this is another Canadian startup. They're in Saskatoon. They're called Vendasta. And so they recently made this transition from sales led to product led. And when they were like pure sales led, their customer acquisition costs were ballpark around $13K per customer they bring in. And so that's quite a bit of money. Their payback period did take just under a year for them. But then whenever they went product led, they were looking at a customer acquisition cost of about $3K. So it was just like a monumental difference in the chunk of change you save. And they were able to also still charge the same rates that they were doing before. And so there was just a lot more value because they upgraded throughout that whole time. Their customer experience and user experience is better to use for their partners and everyone else. So yeah, there is a serious competitive advantage here that we need to discuss around just when you are product led, you can offer even the best price with the best product to win the majority of the market share in your market if you choose that way. Whereas if you're sales led, it's just going to become harder and harder for you to compete.
Yeah, it's such a good point because it's not like you're lowering your customer acquisition costs and directly passing that on to your client, right? And it's not
Yeah.
like you're lowering your customer acquisition costs by cutting corners or hiring crappy salespeople. It's like I'm cutting out the cost and literally passing it on to the end clients in a way that they want to buy, in a way that they actually want to participate in.
Yeah. And like, honestly, in a lot of these product-led companies, what they're doing with those cost savings is they're just putting it back into the product. Maybe not all of it, but they're putting a lot more and investing a lot more in R&D. And so that just fuels the flywheel again. When you think about like next year and the year after that, our product, we're investing
It's getting
maybe
better.
double or triple what our other competitors are putting into our product. So eventually, like, there's the word of mouth virality of that too. Like, this product just wins out, period. And so it does become a reinforcing effect when you start playing that game and reinvesting whatever you're saving in the customer acquisition cost back into your product.
Well, Wes, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciated the time.
No worries. This has been a blast.